Hello, I'm Phil Svitek, 360 Creative Coach, and this is my blog where I highlight my journey and kind of extract the various lessons that I learned along the way, as well as highlight the lessons and tactics that I use to apply to various challenges. So almost kind of an unnecessary thing to say, but we're in this global pandemic, so that's kind of primarily what we're all dealing with. For the first time in history, in my history certainly, I can sort of recall like everyone's going through the same thing, and we're reacting to it in different ways. But nonetheless, in our collective consciousness, this global pandemic exists. And I did a video yesterday. You can check it out. I'll link to it, but it's basically about the idea of fair and unfair. And I won't give the whole lesson right here, right now, but summarized, basically, if you try to think in terms of fair and unfair, especially right now, it'll be very debilitating because it puts you in the passenger seat of life when in fact you have more control than you think. So again, this is something that I go in depth upon, and I also extract the various things that I was sort of dealing with. So I would encourage you to check that out. But I won't get into it right now because obviously I've already talked about it. Instead, what I want to talk about is this notion that when I began the year, everyone always kind of picks New Year's resolutions, or they pick a word to embody what they want the year to look like. And mine was a word, but it was kind of a cheat because it was hyphenated. It was eating shit. Meaning I wanted to just kind of get down to the nitty-gritty and essentially be able to thrive no matter what, like get to a place where I wasn't spending my money aimlessly. I was spending it on stuff that was actually important and essential. I wasn't wasting time on stupid things as defined by me, not by anyone else, and whatever else, right? Not going out to restaurants and just eating out all the time, like all these types of things, right? Living not a lavish lifestyle, but certainly sort of the Instagram culture of life. And so, that was sort of my word, and it's kind of ironic now, or maybe ironic's not the right word, but it essentially that whole mental shift, that notion really prepared me for now. I remember when I began the year, I really said, like, I won't go grocery shopping until I've eaten everything in my fridge. So many people complain like there's never anything in the fridge that I noticed. And so and in fact, they do have stuff in the fridge. So I was like, okay, well, let me just put that theory to test. When I get to a point of like, well, there's nothing in my fridge, I'll just keep going until there's literally nothing in my fridge. And I was able to just do grocery shopping at the beginning of the year and essentially survive for 7 weeks without having to go grocery shopping. Now you start eating like sardines and canned soup by the end, but you can survive. And that was kind of a way of testing myself. The Stoics have this idea that you should at least take 1 week out of the year to live very humbly. And certainly that experiment put me in that state of mind. And now during this pandemic, it's really helpful to know. I went for 4 weeks without having to grocery shop and whatever else. So I understand, like, it's tough if like you haven't been doing that and now you're sort of backtracking, but nonetheless know that you do actually have options, and there is a way out of this. And rather than look at it as a challenge, look at it as a puzzle. There's always more options. It's just how willing are we to accept the options that we do have, because some of us, again, we're used to X, Y, and Z, and it's like, well, that's no longer possible right now, for the time being at least. So you have to readjust, and you have to humble yourself in this time. I actually was sort of criticized in my circle of friends for the various things that I'm doing in terms of like, I always try to look for the hopeful message in everything that I do, and it's not always easy, trust me, but nonetheless, I always try to look to the positive, because that's what gets me through it. Happiness is a choice, I've come to realize. But I got criticized because I was trying to help my various friends, and the criticism essentially was, it was very petty ultimately. Like I said, like, hey, if you do have investments, I am certainly not, by no means like an investor, but I said, here's my thoughts of what I'm doing to sort of rebalance my portfolio and take a less hit and so forth. And in fact, try to not time the market, because I don't believe in timing the market, but, to a degree, like come out, use this to my advantage, kind of like the Warren Buffett style. When people panic, there's opportunity. And that doesn't come from a place of greed, but it's like, it just comes from a place, I'm certainly not a multimillionaire making like huge investments and profiting off people, but nonetheless, I like why I know, one of the ways people can get ahead is through investments. So why not use this to my advantage if I can? And so I put that out and to my friends, and the response I got, great, I got $5. Now what do I do? And, I understand not everyone's in a place to be able to do a lot of things that certainly I'm talking about. And I get that when people are struggling for how to make rent and food and so forth, that, like the idea of leisure time and just being bored would be such a huge luxury. So I understand that. But at the same time, I think we also have to be willing to accept what actual realities, So in that case, like, it's one of those things like, okay, I understand that we're in two different situations, and yet you're someone who's out like buying alcohol and kind of useless things right now that are not fully essential. So if you actually cut down on just like drinking and buying like bottles of wine, you would have a lot more money, right? But people aren't always willing to be honest with them. So there's always things in your life that you can actually cut out. It's just how willing are you to actually do that and be honest with yourself? That's what this all comes down to. So, it's obviously, in my case, a lot easier if you've already practiced those notions instead of having these things thrust upon you by force. But nonetheless, you have a decision and a choice to make about how you react to this, and you can react in a better way. As far as like kind of the more just day-to-day life stuff, it's interesting. So this past weekend, we were supposed to have an Emerson College soccer alumni get-together, and obviously that didn't happen. And, as it got towards the end of the week, I just had it was partly the weather in LA, it was raining and it was crappy and things like that. Like, it was just a lot of factors all at once of like, like I just kind of feel shitty, right? And part of it was just, sensing other people's anxiety around me. But also I kind of looked at it of like, I don't know, you just inherently, unconsciously know of like, oh, I was supposed to be doing something fun this weekend and that's no longer there. So you kind of feel shitty about it. And, once you realize it's not like the pain necessarily goes away, but at least you're aware of it. And so, one of the things that I tried to do is, once I was aware of it, tried to create a solution. And, it was such a simple thing. I was like, well, we were supposed to get together. We can't. Everyone's doing Zoom meetings, so why don't we try to do a Zoom meeting? Now, unfortunately, it was kind of like too last minute, so we didn't get all the people that we wanted to, but it was still a fun time. We did it on Saturday, this past Saturday, and, all the sort of past coaches and present coaches that, I've certainly known, they were there, and a bunch of players, from my generation, the generation beyond me, meaning the ones that are like, in the 2010s, and certainly past generations from like the 80s and the 90s, they were there, and it was just fun to kind of catch up. We told stories, and, the stories had to be like PG, just because, people were taking care of their kids and so forth. But nonetheless, it was still a fun time. Certainly not as fun as it would have been to like actually get together and have a whole weekend, and especially since a lot of people were missing there. But nonetheless, it's just something. And so these are kind of ways that I think we all can kind of continue to look forward to and just do. But there's a notion that I actually read about how some of these Zoom calls are actually tricking us, because we feel like we're tricking our brains to see that we're with a certain person, but our bodies don't feel that actual human connection, and so it kind of creates a distance. So if for some reason, you're feeling down, even though you're doing a lot of Zoom calls, that's normal, and maybe, instead like talk with people on the phone because it might be working against you in some way. I don't know. It's just something that I read, and it's interesting to think about from that perspective. As far as like creative stuff that I'm doing, so we actually finished the poster for my feature film Idol. I put that up on Instagram, and it's also on IMDb, so that's very, very exciting. And yeah, it's great to have that out there. I think the poster came out really, really well. One of the downsides is, in an ideal scenario, we would have gotten, at least individually, we would have done photo shoots with all the main actors. There's 6 of them, and we could have done poses. That, just because of everything that wasn't going to happen, and I didn't want to wait, because who knows when this is ultimately going to be lifted. So I was like, well, I just wanted to kind of continue momentum in that way. And so I grabbed screenshots from the movie, which that was quite interesting, because obviously, like, when something works for the movie, that's great, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a great picture, like a still frame from an entire movie. But we found, I don't want to use the word usable, because it makes it sound really, really shitty, but we found my Ian Kaiser, my producer, and Courtney Stewart, we like painstakingly went through these and made sure that we liked the ones, and also Khalil, he helped as well. So yeah, we picked out the ones that we thought worked well, and we put them on the poster, and I think for all intents and purposes, it came out really good. I'm very proud of it, and it just feels great to have something completed like that, and not that it wasn't, but now it's really starting to feel like, oh, this is a real movie. So it's kind of cool. Now the next kind of phase of it is doing the trailer, and I kind of put together a very rough version. Overall, there's a lot more talking than is necessary. Sometimes, like with a trailer, you want to leave a lot of intrigue, but I went, you're just making a rough draft, and kind of, it's a lot easier to revise when there's something there to revise versus nothing. So I just kind of made something from start to finish that I thought flowed at the time, and it does, but just too much dialogue, and now I got to go back and do a second pass of like adding more visuals and changing up the music cues, and kind of adding a little bit more energy towards the end, and kind of really ramp it up. So I'm excited to do that. I could have done it over the weekend and things like that, but actually the thing that not slowed me down, but I love Final Fantasy, the video game series. I haven't played all of them, but certainly like 7 through 10 were just like staples of my childhood. And for those unaware, like Square Enix decided to remake Final Fantasy VII, which is quite considered like one of the best video games ever. That actually finally dropped after essentially 5 years, because they made an announcement that they were redoing this in 2015. It finally dropped this weekend, and so I allowed myself the time to just play that. I haven't beaten it by any means, but it's a very fun video game, and I was like, this is something that I enjoy and want to enjoy, and so why work for the sake of just working? Instead I allowed myself to just have a fun weekend and play the video game. I mean, it wasn't the only thing that I did, but certainly didn't do the trailer and things like that. The other aspect that I did last week that I started was I've always had the notion that I wanted to write a how-to book about my making of my feature film, in the vein of Robert Rodriguez, his book Rebel Without a Crew, about his making of El Mariachi. And having written now 2 books, it's quite a process. So I wanted to kind of do it a little bit differently. What I'm going for is, I've decided, let me have my friend Daryl Kristen interview me essentially on the entire process, and we'll transcribe that, and that'll serve as like 70% of the book. So we did like a 2-hour session. It's not complete, it's probably going to be like a total of 8 to 10 hours because, you certainly look in an audio book. Most audio books end up being about 8 hours. And so, that I figure like, let's do about an 8-hour interview, and it's not just like, let's just do 8 hours for the sake of 8 hours. We'll do it in chunks, and I'll kind of assess, okay, what are missing spots that we have yet to talk about? What do we need to fill in more? Blah, blah, blah. So it gives us a chance to readjust, and, certainly it would not be conducive to conduct an 8-hour interview. We would both be tired and so forth. So this is my process, and, once I have the interviews, I'm going to get them transcribed, and, like I said, that'll serve as ideally 70% of the book, so, and that's kind of what I've been doing. The other aspect, I saw my friend Alicia Malone post on Twitter that, during quarantine, she was excited to look forward to seeing movies from her like unseen list, but she's actually revisiting old ones because it gives her comfort. I think that's cool. I nothing wrong with that. What I commented to her was, I've been doing a mix. So my friends and I, we made a list of movies, kind of recommendations to each other. And, what's fun is, so I've been Skyping with a person. We're kind of trading movies in that way, where there's recommendations, that I've made and that she's made, and we're kind of syncing up sometimes. Like there's a look up Netflix party, that's a way to sync up. Then there's of course like the more ghetto way where you're both on Skype and you go like, all right, 3, 2, 1, go. But the point of all this is that it's fun to, there's movies that I'm introducing and there's movies that I'm being introduced. So, there's a trade-off of both. There's a comfort level for me of seeing old stuff that I'm familiar with and revisiting, but at the same time, I'm getting a curated version of movies that other people love as well. And so, so I think that's cool and beneficial, and I would kind of recommend to you that way. So that's kind of it overall. I'm still working on the outline for what I hope to be my second feature. It's a process. It's definitely, just kind of, it's an ambitious project, so I'm asking myself various questions. But at the same time, I'm not necessarily going full tilt. I'm, I would say I'm like going 70 to 80% overall, and I think in this time of quarantine, I think that's overall okay. I think too many people have this notion of productivity, and I think it's not to say like just stop completely, but it's also okay to take it a little bit easier on yourself and so forth. Like a lot of people, a lot of friends that I've talked to that were used to working from home before this, one of the things I tell them is like, you have to understand, people getting into this space of working from home, this is not a normal working from home experience, because like some of them have kids and, they're not going to school and whatever else. So like, this is not the standard of work from home type of thing. So we got to cut people some slack overall. And I guess the last thing I'll leave you on, since I want to always use this as a positive platform, I see too many people kind of use megaphones for criticism, and instead what I would encourage you to do is use your social media and whatever else to highlight good things that you see. I think too often we highlight all the negativity in the world, and sometimes we need to focus on the positive, and there's a lot to focus on in terms of the positive. So yeah, I would encourage you to do that. Anyway, that's it for me this week. If you have any questions or comments, by all means, write them down below or hit me up on social media at Svitek. Happy to converse with you. Thank you for taking the time to tune in. I hope this is beneficial in some small way for you, and I hope to see you next time.